Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad you can be here with us to celebrate Cardus's birthday. Even though you're watching virtually, we're thrilled that you're here, and we're determined to make this a wonderful and uplifting experience for you. My name is Brian Dijkema. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs here at Cardus, and I'm going to be your MC for this week. Now, let's get straight to the festivities. Tonight in Ottawa, we're gathering at the Westin Hotel to celebrate, and we're getting rolling right now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, we love the rowdy table over there. That's the Cardus Next Gen table right there. Those are the people who are going to be leading the country in a few years. Behave yourselves, kids. Good evening and welcome. My name is Brian Dijkema. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs here at Cardus. On behalf of the board of Cardus, on behalf of our president, Michael Van Pelt, and all the Cardus staff, we welcome you to our 20th anniversary celebration. Yeah, that's right. You're allowed to clap. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been too long. It's been too long, and it's great to be together. It's great to see real people in a real room that aren't one-by-one squares on a screen. Are you sick of it? Are you glad to be together? Let's do some things that you can't do on Zoom. Let's make a little bit of noise tonight. I encourage you tonight, as we are gathered here together, the first large Cardus event that we've had in a long time, to look around you, have yourself a drink, enjoy being in one another's presence. This is a party. So let's eat, drink, and be merry. And you know, I do work for a Christian think tank that draws on 2,000 years of social tradition from our Christian thought. So it would be wrong if I didn't encourage you with the words of St. Thomas Aquinas to drink to the point of exhilaration. It'd also be wrong, we're an ecumenical think tank, for me not to mention the more Puritan among us and say that you should exercise the virtue of temperance while drinking to the point of exhilaration. Where that line is something that you will have to discover, and I encourage you to try to find it. I want to welcome all of you, especially those who have come from long distances to be here. I particularly want to note the 28th Governor General, the Right Honorable David Johnston, who has joined us this evening and will be speaking with us later. Mr. Johnston, we're very glad that you're here and we look forward to hearing from you. I also want to acknowledge the members of the Cardus board who give a lot of their time to keep this happy little ship of Cardus sailing in the right direction. There are just a few logistical things that I want to work through with everyone. This is important things to do. As guests of the Westin, we encourage you to follow and ask you to follow their protocols. And their protocols are that if you're not sitting at a table or you're not around a cruiser table, that you continue to wear your masks. It's something that we want to respect their protocols, and we ask that you do that as well. If you're looking for the washrooms, they're just outside the door there and to the right. If for some crazy reason there's an emergency and you need to get out quickly, you can go out the back and out to the right. I took a flight for the last time. Did you see what I did there? I've taken a flight recently and I've sort of come to know that new thing. I won't quit my day job. Thanks, Kathy. Throughout the night, you'll notice on the screen that there will be some slides flashing. And it's something that we want to do to hear from you in the crowd. We can't all talk at once or it'll sound like a Cardus meeting. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to ask you to text on your phones. There should be a number there. 613-703-4500. If you have a moment of beauty from the pandemic, we encourage you to share it with us. And we also encourage you to give us recommendations for Cardus's next 20 years. As with any birthday party, this is a time to look back to consider our present, and to look into hope at the future, not just of Cardus, but the future of this country. The future of this country and its institutions, its leaders, and the array of interlinked communities where Canadians in their daily lives create the culture of this wonderful country. I'm the child of Dutch immigrants who came here because Canadians liberated their country. I know there are probably a few others who share that story in this room, and it's a good time for us to remember that and look back and to remember the sacrifices that they've made, particularly on this day. But it's also an opportunity for us to look into the future and to remember, in the words of Alden Nolan's poem, that I'm going to read a little bit here from Alden Nolan's poem. He's talking about his connection with one of the soldiers who died in Ypres 1915. And he's talking about the sacrifices that they made and the feeling that that evokes in him. He says, "And that's ridiculous too, and nothing on which to found a country. Still, it makes me feel good knowing that in some obscure, conclusive way, that they were connected with me and me with them." I think it's important to remember on this day to remember that we are connected with those who have gone past and beyond us, but to know that we are connected with one another. At Cardus, we try to do that work. We try to encourage and to forge those chains of connections amongst many communities and the people who live within them. And we would encourage you to just join us in celebrating those strong chains and those strong interlinkages tonight. And so with that, I'd like to introduce us to our president, Michael Van Pelt, to open this evening's session with a few words about this institution and why we're here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Van Pelt.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Van Pelt. I'm President and Chief Executive of Cardus. On behalf of our Board of Directors and the whole Cardus team, it's a crazy team, I want to welcome you to this gala celebration tonight. I also want to welcome hundreds of friends from across Canada and the United States who are joining us tonight virtually as well. Tonight, in our 21st year, we celebrate our 20th anniversary of Cardus. Tonight, let's hold in balance the joy of our being together in common purpose with the trouble and brokenness that has so dramatically entered our world. Anxiety, fear, illness, death, economic dislocation, complex decisions with no good end. COVID has insidiously tackled our weaknesses. Yet, the vitality of Cardus and many other institutions is just one of those hopeful rays of light today. We know of a hopeful future, and we are cut out to work hard and passionately toward that end. Tonight, we celebrate the opening of Canada's living room, 3 doors down from Canada's Parliament and the House of the Commons. So from wherever you come, you are welcome here. Cardus is occupying 2 top floors of 45 Rideau overlooking the Senate, the National War Memorial, the iconic Chateau Laurier, the National Art Gallery, and the Notre Dame Cathedral. This faith-filled space will welcome voices from across the country in a spirit of Christian hospitality. It will be the place where the ideals of what is good and what is true and what is beautiful will be contested and refined and gently find themselves in the narratives of Canadians across Canada and the institutions and organizations they inhabit. In sum, ladies and gentlemen, our hearts are filled with gratitude and our eyes are toward the future. 20 years ago, we had a vision for a think tank in Canada that would be rooted in Christian social thought, made credible by expert research and expert people. It would be public, full of propositions and conversations beyond our tribe for our common life together. That was an unlikely proposition then. A think tank in Canada, infused by a religious foundation, 2,000 years of Christian social thought. Isn't religion a private matter? What does faith have to do with our public life anyhow? Well, it turns out to be quite a lot. The yearning of our day has a deeply spiritual dynamic to it. I saw this most recently in the over 2,400 people reacting to our yesterday's poll that we did with Angus Reid on the despair of our upcoming generation. Go seek out that thread on Reddit. People are yearning. Young people are yearning. The subtext is everywhere, ladies and gentlemen, and the geopolitics of our day is fresh with religious influences that simply cannot be ignored. So for sure, the first 5 years at Cardus were something of an experiment. A lot of sore stomachs begging for nerves of steel. A risk-taking, supporting community wondering whether their investment would make good. Yet with the support and vision of many people, the seed that we planted began to grow. Now into our 21st year, Cardus has found its place in the public square. We have found a place to call home just across the street here in Ottawa and in Hamilton and far beyond those hubs. We have dedicated staff and senior fellows all across Canada and the United States. Cardus has found its place, its platform, and at age 20, we've become a leading think tank in Canada, holding the most unique intellectual space, very difficult to shove into our country's ideological stereotypes. We are advancing a tremendous cultural aspiration, grounded in Christian social vision, much older than we are, yet most poignant for the challenges of our day. We want to see our parents empowered as the lead educators of our children from early childhood toward a pluralistic education system. We want to see stable marriages and stable families. We want to see religious freedom for everyone, not just for our own homes. We want end-of-life care that sees each soul as masterfully created by the Creator. Every human bears the image of God, and no person should be lonely or marginalized. Thus, our work on gambling and payday loan traps. In short, Cardus wants a thriving society, and we have chosen a dozen vectors as our best chances to bring hope across Canada and across the world. Thus, today, Cardus still remains an unusual proposition with a distinct message and platform. We've learned a lot, and our impact has grown over these years. Our experts, our staff in demand, our research reports are widely read and cited, our staff are on air, online, and in print. We have a dedicated and growing support community, prepared to take calculated risks in advancing the Cardus mission here in Canada and across the world. They hold me, our board of directors, accountable every single day. Our board of directors welcomes creativity and careful planning. The Cardus staff is gifted, and it's a great community team of professionals. They, too, have been sharpened by 2 years of COVID testing and uncertainty. They are cut out to shape the future for growth here in Canada. No doubt, ladies and gentlemen, when pressures are mounting in certain quarters to close down space for Canadians to live out their faith in public life, we are countering those trends by documenting and illustrating the high cost that would be to our civic fabric. So what about the future? Imagine a thriving society. Explore what it means to connect first principles to our public policy. For sure, those are lofty goals that could languish over expensive drinks and unread reports. At Cardus, we have and will drive this big vision for a flourishing society, and then we will attach legs to our vision with straightforward policy development and influence. For sure, the Cardus way of thought will bring forward the work of great intellectuals inside and beyond our tradition. We will meld these ideas into the thinking of a whole new generation of leaders. Most of our inaugural cohort of Next Gen Fellows are in fact here tonight. Seek them out, find them. They're amazing. And to be sure, ladies and gentlemen, this work will all show up in the day-to-day, the practical public policy, the research arguments, the government submissions, the cultural commentaries. The thread will be nuanced, sometimes bright, sometimes invisible. Our moment needs a well-woven argument and narrative that is attractive and durable, including for those that don't start from our own philosophical position. Okay, enough of that. Tonight will be full of intriguing ideas, ladies and gentlemen, delivered by the Right Honorable David Johnston and by one of the most fascinating and challenging poll initiatives commissioned by the Angus Reid Institute and Cardus Partnership. Cardus is not simply a growing organization. It's a growing community represented by so many of you here tonight. Some have traveled with us on this road for a long time. Some are just new to discovering our work. Tonight, we want to say to you, thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to all those who made this work possible and have advanced it through their own spheres of influence. And thank you for joining us on a journey toward a more vibrant, thriving Canada, marked by freedom, opportunity, hospitality, and a hopeful future for all. Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Now I'd like to call upon my longtime friend and not as long colleague, but still a colleague, Father Deacon Andrew Bennett, to come and introduce our next speaker. Andrew.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my sincere honor and privilege to introduce you to this evening the Right Honorable David Johnston. The Right Honorable David Johnston was Canada's 28th Governor General. During his mandate, he established the Rideau Hall Foundation, a registered charity that supports and amplifies the Office of the Governor General in its work to connect, honor, and inspire Canadians. Today, he's involved as the chair of the Rideau Hall Foundation Board of Directors. In 2018, Mr. Johnston was appointed Colonel to the Royal Canadian Regiment, a regiment that we celebrated today. Prior to his installation as Governor General, Mr. Johnston was a professor of law for 45 years and served as president of the University of Waterloo for 2 terms and principal of Canada's finest university, McGill University, for 3 terms. I have to be faithful. He was also the first non-US citizen to be elected chair at Harvard University's Board of Overseers, from which he graduated in 1963, magna cum laude, and was twice named All-American in hockey and was named to Harvard's Athletic Hall of Fame. Mr. Johnston holds degrees from Harvard, Cambridge, and Queen's, and has received more than 36 honorary degrees or fellowships. He has authored or co-authored more than 30 books. He was named Companion of the Order of Canada in 1997. But I dare say he is most proud of having been married for 57 years to his wife Sharon and of his 5 daughters and 14 grandchildren. And having corresponded in a way with Mr. Johnston, I know also that he is a faithful Christian man. And Mr. Johnston, it's an honor to have you with us this evening.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. My 14 grandchildren call me Grandpa Book because I always read a book to him. Je suis ravi d'être parmi vous ce soir pour un anniversaire très important, votre 20e anniversaire. Mais nous avons 2 autres anniversaires aujourd'hui. I'd just like to comment on 2 other important anniversaries. The first is the 100th year today of the poppy, Colicot. You remember John McCrae's remarkable poem in Flanders Fields, and from that came the poppy and the notion of lest we forget. One of my most poignant memories of being in the Flanders Field was seeing the crosses row on row. And the Canadian policy is that not only is the name of the fallen soldier given and his position and so on, his birth date, state of passing, but the family inscribes a little remembrance, if they wish, at the bottom of the cross. And the one that sticks most in my mind is, to the world he was a soldier, to us he was the world. And so when you leave the Westin Hotel tonight, those of you here in person, please just take a moment to glance 100 yards across the canal to the National War Memorial and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And just look at that sculpture with the twin figures of peace and freedom rising up to heaven, and beneath it the sculptures showing the agonies, the tragedies of war and the sacrifice and so on. And just take a moment to remember that as well. Tonight I want to speak a tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. And it comes from an essay that I've done for a book to be published next year on her 70th anniversary on the throne. And I was asked to write about personal reflections on the Queen. And here they are, and they're really summarized in 3 words: graciousness, duty, and faith. And I'll deal with each of these in turn. They're personal lessons that I have learned from this remarkable person. First, graciousness, or never miss an opportunity to be gracious. In June 2010, Sharon, my wife, and I met Her Majesty at a reception at the Royal York Hotel in Toronto. After a brief greeting in the reception line, Her Majesty said very quietly, with a warm smile, "I look forward to seeing you very soon, both of you." The Queen and Prince Philip were the only ones in that gathering who, apart from Sharon and myself, were aware of a closely held secret. Several weeks prior, Sharon and I had met Prime Minister Harper and his wife Lorraine for dinner at 24 Sussex Drive, just down the way. He asked me to become Canada's 28th Governor-General. Only he and the advisory committee for the selection and the Queen, who had agreed to his recommendation, and her private secretary knew of this. But the Queen's gracious smile was a touching signal of welcome in the beginning of a very dear relationship and friendship. We were very lucky in our timing. The custom is for a new Governor-General to meet the Queen for tea or lunch at Buckingham Palace to receive the commission of appointment. The Queen and Prince Philip customarily spend August at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, which is a large estate of 50,000 acres, with the perimeter secured, of course, but with a totally relaxed atmosphere in the castle, which is more like a comfortable country manor house. And we were there for the weekend. The Queen and Prince Philip were on the doorsteps to meet us with the friendliest of greetings. We'd come with a wardrobe of formal clothes and expecting no recreation. At dinner that evening, the Queen began making plans. Sharon ran a 36-horse training stable at our farm in Waterloo before we came to Ottawa, and she loves horses. The Queen, whose interest in horses is legendary, in fact, it is rumored that she will take the call from her horse manager long before she'll take a call from the Prime Minister. The Queen advised Sharon that the two of them would spend the Saturday morning in the stables. Sharon looked delighted, but then she grimaced and she looked down at her feet and stammered, but I don't have proper shoes. The Duke, without missing a beat, looked under the table at Sharon's feet and then at his wife's feet and said, "Same size, I think." The Queen promptly rose from the table, went upstairs, and returned with a well-worn pair of brogues, which Sharon immediately put on and wore for the entire weekend. Saturday evening involved a journey on the estate over a narrow, stony, one-car-width Highland road towering a half-kilometer or so above a river. The Queen was driving her Land Rover, with me in the passenger seat. Prince Philip, as was his custom, was driving his Land Rover, with Sharon beside him. We arrived at a distant shepherd's hut. The Duke began to barbecue the venison he had shot on the estate a week before. It became very clear to me that this was his job, and he needed no help from me. So I proceeded into the kitchen, and there was the Queen, setting the table herself. I immediately began to arrange plates and knives and forks. She paused from her labors and remarked, "You do that very well. Your mother would be proud." In my mind's eye, I was hoping Her Majesty was also thinking, "And you'll be just fine as a GG." Midway through the dinner, after the sun had set, we heard bagpipes. Descending from the hill was a piper accompanied by two plaid-clad young women. They greeted us with a Highland dance and introduced themselves as Canadians on exchange with the palace as part of their internship. They were absolutely scintillating, and we had a wonderfully animated discussions about what they had learned. How enlightening that was for Sharon and for me, and how these characteristics of Her Majesty, so typical to bring a Canadian flavor to our visit. We left on the Saturday, on the Sunday, with the most gracious couple seeing us off as if we were long-standing friends. As we drove out the long driveway, we agreed that we had experienced the most surprising and delightful weekend that one could ever imagine. I should add that as we parted, the Queen said to me, "I do read letters, you know." That was unexpected, but I managed to reply, "I shall comply with pleasure, and when they become dull and boring, please advise me and I shall cease and desist." I followed the routine of penning a letter every quarter or so during our 7 years at Rideau Hall. This is one of my peculiar ancient customs of another time, sending handwritten letters. Shortly after the Balmoral visit, and inspired by the Canadian dancers, we arranged for one of our senior staff to go on an exchange with the Palace to give our Rideau Hall team an opportunity to get to know their counterparts in London. As she was finishing her week, the Queen invited our staff member for a farewell tea and said to her, "Please tell the Governor-General how much I enjoy his personal letters. But would you please give special thanks to his assistant?" Kelly, where are you? My assistant. Raise your hand, Kelly, right over there. "Please give my special thanks to his assistant who takes the trouble to type the letters so they are legible." True story, correct, Kelly? After I'd written these personal reflections for this essay to be published on the unforgettable Balmoral visit, and there are other stories that are part of that essay that I've excluded just in interest of time tonight, I had a concern that I was taking too much liberty with the convention that communications with Her Majesty are confidential. I really worried about that. And then I received a surprise. It was my 80th birthday, and unbeknown to me, my friends at the Rideau Hall Foundation had solicited letters of congratulations, over 80 of them, and printed them in a book entitled, get this, Father, a book entitled Letters from a Nation, being a play on the title of the first book I wrote after becoming Governor-General, entitled The Idea of Canada, Letters to a Nation, and you received one of those. Letters to a Nation, following my practice of letter writing. I set out below the opening letter in the book Letters from a Nation, which you will see eased my mind totally about revealing those personal reflections I just spoke about. Here it is. And the heading is Buckingham Windsor Castle, the Right Honourable David Johnston. On the occasion of your 80th birthday, I am pleased to send you my congratulations together with my warmest good wishes for your continued health and happiness. I have happy memories of our meetings over a number of years, especially your visit to Balmoral in 2019. Elizabeth R. I was lucky to be able to recount a few of these events to shed light on the Queen as a person whom few of us in Canada get the chance to know. If we had, we would be overwhelmed and touched by Her Majesty's graciousness, empathy, common sense, and good humor. Now, the second value, duty. Do your duty no matter how humble the task. Upon the death of Her Majesty's father when she was 25, the new Queen said, "So long as I live, it shall be my duty to serve my people to the best of my ability." What is stirring is that Her Majesty had not expected to become Queen. It was only on the abdication of her uncle Edward when Her Majesty was 10 that these royal duties were thrust upon her. She now has served for almost 7 decades, the longest reigning British monarch in history. And if there were 2 words to describe that tenure, they would be steadfast in duty. She epitomizes the servant leader. This concept is as old as the Bible and the ancient writings of Lao Tzu, Plutarch, and Xenophon. But in 1970, Robert Greenleaf modernized the term thus: a servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong. Sounds a bit like Cardus, doesn't it? While traditional leadership generally involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at the top of the pyramid, servant leadership is different. The servant leader shares power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. Let me cite one other example of how the Queen has lent her influence to encourage servant leadership in Canadian honors. In 1996, Governor-General Romeo LeBlanc created the Caring Canadian Award to celebrate volunteerism, in particular to recognize those unsung heroes who as volunteers made their communities better. He was mindful of his modest upbringing in a small Acadian village where volunteerism was the lifeblood of the community. In fact, I would extrapolate to say that if you wish to judge the health of any community in Canada, calculate the number of volunteers per capita in that community. If that number is up, so is that community. If it is down, so is that community. Governor-General LeBlanc was sensitive to the fact that we initiated the Order of Canada in 1967 and had other honors that celebrated Canadians who were in the headlines. But we missed out on the unsung heroes who quietly ran the myriad of volunteer work at the community level. He began with 50 or so Caring Canadian Awards per year during his tenure, but alas, the award was gradually phased out in the subsequent years due to budget cuts at Rideau Hall. When we created the Rideau Hall Foundation in 2012 to amplify the reach of the Office of the Governor-General, one of our first projects was to raise $5 million to endow and restore the Volunteers Award and bulletproof it from future budget cuts. It became a great success. When we briefed Her Majesty through her private secretary about it, we proposed that it become a Queen's Honour, elevated from a Governor-General's Honour, like the Order of Canada, a Queen's Honour, and that we call it the Queen Elizabeth Medal for Volunteerism. Her Majesty enthusiastically accepted, but the Queen preferred that it be called the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers so that it would be sustained through the generations. And in my last year as Governor-General in 2017, over 1,000 of these awards were conferred on Canada's unsung heroes, and we should do many more. Let me turn finally to faith. Connect with your faith to see beyond the darkness. My own Christian faith has been challenged, reaffirmed, and reinvigorated during the privileged years Sharon and I spent at Rideau Hall, particularly through our understanding of the Queen's faith and the circumstances and weight of her responsibilities. Her Christian faith has been at the core of her leadership as servant. I'm a lay reader in the Anglican Church. As such, I have spoken at a number of mayors' private prayer breakfast gatherings in cities across Canada. And I very often employ the Queen's own Christian message in these testimonials, in particular her Christmas messages. Let me refer to some of them here in my closing remarks. In the foreword to a little book about Her Majesty's faith that was published in honor of the Queen's 90th birthday, entitled The Servant Queen and the King She Serves, Her Majesty indicated that her trust in faith began early in her life. She referred to a poem quoted by her father George VI in his Christmas broadcast in 1939. Europe, again, found itself at war. The invasion of Britain was an imminent peril. The king, who had to work to overcome a debilitating stammer, had been thrust onto the throne only 2 years earlier, surprised and unprepared, after the abdication of Edward VIII. And this is the poem which he read without a stammer. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night, and he led me towards the hills and the breaking of day in the lone east. What is less known is who gave that poem to King George. It was the future Queen, Princess Elizabeth, as 13 years old, his daughter. Typical of Her Majesty's lifelong tendency to understate and depersonalize, that information is not contained in Her Majesty's foreword to the book. It's only disclosed later in the book by others. The Queen's faith is robustly rooted and ever present. In her annual Christmas broadcasts, Her Majesty always refers to Jesus Christ and his teachings. In 1984, Her Majesty said, "For me, the life of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, whose birth we celebrate today, is an inspiration and an anchor in my life, a role model of reconciliation and forgiveness. He stretched out his hands in love, acceptance, and healing. Christ's example has taught me to seek, respect, and value all people, of what other faith or none." So the Queen's strong Christian faith does not lead Her Majesty to exclude other faiths or minorities, but rather to embrace them, to accord them the same respect and dignity she does to those who share her own beliefs. Former Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks of the United Kingdom, recently said, "We do not always appreciate the role the Queen has played in one of the most significant changes in the past 60 years, the transformation of Britain into a multi-ethnic, multi-faith society. No one does interfaith better than the royal family, and it starts with the Queen herself. Her presence and her family role as the human face of national identity is one of the great unifying forces in Britain, a unity we need all the more diverse religiously and culturally we become." Well, Rabbi Sacks' observation apply equally well to Canada. Service springs from the Queen's faith. After she pledged a lifetime of service on her 21st birthday, 61 years later, in her 2008 Christmas broadcast, Her Majesty said, "I hope that, like me, you will be comforted by the example of Jesus of Nazareth, who often in circumstances of great adversity managed to live an outgoing, unselfish, and sacrificial life. Countless millions of people around the world continue to celebrate his birthday at Christmas, inspired by his teaching. He makes it clear that genuine human happiness and satisfaction lie more in giving than receiving, more in serving than being served. We can surely be grateful that 2,000 years after the birth of Jesus, so many of us are able to draw inspiration from his life and message, and to find in him a source of strength and courage." What is the secret of the Queen's remarkable consistency of service? In her Christmas broadcast in 2002, she said, "I know just how much I rely on my faith to guide me through the good times and the bad. Each day is a new beginning. I know that the only way to live my life is to try to do what is right, to take the long view, to give of my best in all that the day brings, and to put my trust in God. I draw strength from the message of hope in the Christmas gospel." The Queen sees, as my wife reminds me, that service is love made real. It is interesting to me, but not surprising, that love, especially the commandment to love thy neighbor, is at the core not only of the Christian religion, but of so many of the other great faiths around the world. In another Christmas broadcast, the Queen showed her understanding of the practicality of this commandment. She said, "Many will have been inspired by Jesus' simple but powerful teaching. Love God and love thy neighbor as thyself." Or in other words, treat others as you would like them to treat you. His great emphasis was to give spirituality a practical purpose. And here's a question. Which parable of Jesus does Her Majesty most often quote? It's the story of the Good Samaritan, which tells of a Hebrew man beaten by robbers and left wounded by the roadside. He was bypassed by his well-placed kinsman, first a priest and then a Levite. Then along came the Samaritan, who was from a different tribe, neither friend nor kin, who took him up and restored him as a simple act of compassion. For Her Majesty, another of the essential guideposts of love is forgiveness. In the Queen's 2013 Christmas broadcast, she said, "Although we are capable of great acts of kindness, history teaches us that we are sometimes need saving from ourselves, from our recklessness or our greed. God sent into the world a unique person, neither a philosopher nor a general, important though they are, but a Savior with the power to forgive. Forgiveness lies at the heart of the Christian faith. It can heal broken families, it can restore friendships, and it can reconcile divided communities. It is in forgiveness that we feel the power of God's love." But perhaps the most powerful of Her Majesty's lessons for me is the one from the Queen's 1975 Christmas broadcast, which speaks of this fundamental truth of love and its impact throughout our society. She said, "Christ's simple message of love has been turning the world upside down ever since his birth. He showed that what people are and what they do does matter and does make all the difference. He commanded us to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. But what exactly is meant by loving ourselves? I believe it means trying to make the most of the abilities we've been given. It means caring for our talents. It's a matter of making the best of ourselves, not just doing the best for ourselves." I want to end this brief journey through the Queen's inspiring dedication to faith, service, and love by appraising the impact of Her Majesty's observations in Her Majesty's life. The title of my installation address in 2010, when I began the job of Governor General, was "A Smart and Caring Nation, a Call to Service." This was about the good society, about calling on our better angels. And so much of what I have tried to do since has been influenced by Christian faith, as illuminated by the Queen's messages. So let me end with a final quote from the 1975 Christmas broadcast, where Her Majesty spoke of the impact and the legacy of love. "Laissez-moi terminer mon témoignage sur la foi, le service et l'amour en citant la reine. We're all different, but each of us has his own best to offer. The responsibility for the way we live life with all its challenges, sadness, and joy is ours alone. If we do this well, it will also be good for our neighbors." And she continues, "If you throw a stone into a pool, the ripples go on spreading outwards. Big stone can cause waves, but even the smallest pebble changes the whole pattern of the water. Our daily actions are like those ripples. Each one makes a difference, even the smallest. It does matter, therefore, what each individual does each day. Kindness, sympathy, resolution, and courteous behavior are infectious. Acts of courage and self-sacrifice, like those of the people who refuse to be terrorized by kidnappers or hijackers, or who defuse bombs, are an inspiration to others. And the combined effect can be enormous. If enough grains of sand are dropped into one side of a pair of scales, they will, in the end, tip it against a lump of lead. We may feel powerless alone, but the joint efforts of individuals can defeat the evils of our time. Together, they can create a stable, free, and considerate society. La vie et la foi constante de Sa Majesté la Reine est une source d'inspiration pour moi. Merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, celebrating milestones like this is not just about looking back, it's looking into the future. And tonight, we're going to get down to Cardus business. Can't help ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Friday night, but who cares? Thursday night. Yeah. Brian, I didn't need that fix-up, did I? Okay, that's right. So we can get at this. Tonight we're going to release a major poll and research study led by the Angus Reid Institute and its Cardus partnership. So let me set the stage for this, ladies and gentlemen, just for a little bit. We've conducted now over 13 studies, together exploring attitudes to faith in our public life with the Angus Reid Institute. These research efforts have not only spawned numerous commentaries, consultations, media engagements, and academic citations, they have actually collected into a unique body of inquiry. We have pioneered a new way of measuring religious engagement beyond the traditional proxy of church attendance. We have begun to map the trajectory of faith and its public life implications, and we can now start beginning to explore the longitudinal aspects of this story. This evening's poll is especially significant. We have partnered on the largest study ever taken on the attitudes of young leaders under 40, tracking faith, morality, leadership, and the public square. This poll represents over 4,000 respondents. Further, in that we have a reliable subset of leaders under 40 and over the age of 40, allowing us thus to contrast where they have come from and where they might be heading. We wanted to learn about the range of views and priorities of those influencers who will shape the direction of this country in the decades ahead. Tonight, we'll get just a little glimpse into those findings, and there will be a series of releases and obvious deep dives that you can watch for in the months ahead. So, let's get into it, but ladies and gentlemen, I do need to tell you that Angus Reid is actually a person. He's a gentleman, and he's one of the most creative and accomplished thinkers and business leaders in Canada. Let's hear Angus Reid himself on the Angus Reid Institute Cardus partnership and his initial thoughts on the poll tonight.
I would like to congratulate Cardus on 20 years of really being a pioneer in trying to understand and advance the role of faith in the public square, to understand where faith stands in the hearts and minds of ordinary Canadians, not just in the media and in politics, but to really understand certainly Christian faith, but faith more generally as it affects ordinary Canadians and Canadian society. And our relationship with Cardus has been a very fruitful 7-year relationship in which we've carried out a great many studies trying to understand not only where Canadians are at, but the changing dynamic of faith, both again from a Christian perspective, but also in the context of the multi-faith, the diversity that exists now in Canada. And this has been an important part of our work, and we've really treasured our relationship with Cardus. The work that we have recently done with Cardus, looking at leadership, not just from the standpoint of demographics, but more importantly, looking at how generational shifts are occurring with respect to the leadership dynamic in Canada, is really, in my many decades of experience as a pollster, some of the most groundbreaking work that I've seen. We are involved as a society in Canada in a major transition from one generation to a new generation, which carries with it a whole set of different perspectives and a whole different way of looking at life that I think we need to listen to, we need to learn from, and then we need to determine how best to communicate with the leaders that will carry Canadian society into the next years and decades.
Canada's young leaders are looking for change, in some cases radical change. But before we get to the findings of the survey by the Angus Reid Institute in partnership with Cardus, we need to ask, when we say leaders, whom do we mean? In this survey, respondents answered questions about, not surprisingly, leadership qualities like ambition or the ability to handle stress. They were also asked about activities such as volunteering, contacting public officials, advocating their positions publicly, or attending protests. Those who scored highest are considered leaders. Perhaps the most significant finding from this poll is that leaders under age 40 tend to think of their task as starting over and creating something new, rather than building on the work of past generations. Almost half of leaders in their 20s and 40% of those in their 30s favor starting over, compared to just about a quarter of those over age 40. In terms of priority issues, climate change is tops for everyone, but things diverge after that. Leaders generally place a higher emphasis on Indigenous reconciliation than non-leaders. Meanwhile, younger Canadians, leaders or not, tend to emphasize housing and income inequality, while older Canadians seem more concerned about poverty and especially balanced budgets. Leaders have a much greater sense of agency, believing they can make a difference, compared to non-leaders, and that gap increases over time. Overall, the numbers make clear. Young Canadians are not happy with the status quo, they're setting their own agenda, and their leaders believe they can get it done.
What you got was the first picture, kind of taking a leadership approach to the poll. But before we get there, let me kind of set the stage of this conversation that we're going to have tonight with our panelists on the table. Our conversation is going to be divided into 4 sections tonight. Number 1, on leadership, some of the questions that were actually shown on that video. Number 2, on demographics. Let's look at the questions around demographics. And then number 3, let's go back to the whole question of the spectrum of spirituality that Angus Reid Partnership and Cardus have built. And then finally, let's look at faith in our public life. And then actually Daniel Proussalidis is going to come up in each section and kind of reintroduce and bring some new data to the table, and I'll cue him up when we're ready. Before I do that, though, I want to just make a quick pause, and I want to thank John and Rebecca Horwood. They're here tonight with us. They actually were the first ones who really underwrote this partnership with Cardus. They were here when it was just an idea that we think we should do this, and this is going to be a great and important conversation into the future. So tonight, John and Rebecca, this is actually an expression of your own passion for faith in our public life. So let's move on to the panel. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the panel tonight. Let me start with Shachi Kurl. Shachi is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. You will find Shachi in the middle here, basically everywhere across the country, if we want to really put it that way. But formally, you'll hear her on CBC's Power and Politics. She's writing in the Globe and Mail. She's in the New York Times. She's basically everywhere, ladies and gentlemen. And we're delighted to have her here tonight, and we're delighted to be in partnership with you, Shachi. And then second of all, I want to introduce Andreae Sennyah. Andreae, we are just so delighted that you just have joined Cardus. Andreae is our new Director of Policy, coming to us from Alberta, where she held a number of research and civil society roles. She was also a political staffer in the provincial legislature as well. Andreae, incidentally, is one of 12 of our first class of Cardus Next Gen Fellows. You're so welcome to be with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're right on. I like that. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, someone who is completely unknown to this audience, my colleague and friend, Ray Pennings, really the initial instigator of this idea. You know what, Ray? I'm going to blame you on this one, man. The instigator of the idea. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So let's get into this question of the poll. And I want to just, Shachi, may I go to you first? Give me your overall kind of gut sense. You've looked much deeper than what we've seen. What's the whole picture of this 4,000 respondent study telling us? A little bit of the description, and then give me your gut instincts about what this means for the future.
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. As we all start to get on planes again, as we all start to see our friends again and connect again in such a very heartwarming way. I can tell you Angus is a real person because he phones me about 8 times a day. What's going on now? What's happening now? Did you get the numbers on this? What does this say? What's going on? What's going on with that?
That's
okay,
so
man.
true. I can imagine.
I beg you, go back to the 9 holes in Palm Springs, please. Please. And I say that, he's probably watching this online, so hi, boss. But that's my privilege when you work with someone over 9 or 19 years, depending on when you start the clock. And Angus and I have worked together over many years. We have always, I just want to say a couple things about the Institute itself. We were founded in 2014 by Dr. Reid to be a clearinghouse of polling data that doesn't work with clients, that doesn't do the bidding of organizations that have an interest and want to push an agenda, but instead have a truly, this is the only moment I'm going to use this word, agnostic approach to understanding what's happening in this country and how people think, what they're feeling, and what we can learn from that. And what we have found in Cardus as a partner on the research that we've been doing now, over 6 or 7 years, and are so delighted to continue this work hand in hand and arm together, is the pureness with which we approach questions and what we hope to try to learn, and the hypotheses we put into the universe with our polling, and then what we get back, and the ability to speak honestly and clearly about it and not worry about the results, what the results say, but really try to understand what's going on in our country is refreshing. And I, again, as donors, I congratulate you for supporting an organization like this. So thank you for that, because it makes this work wonderful and it makes it possible. So we talked to 4,000 Canadians across the country, and we asked them a bunch of questions about their lives, about how they interact with society, how they interact with their communities, what their core beliefs are about their own ability to have impact or make a difference on the things that they are seeing in this country, or whether they feel that they no matter what they do, they really can't make an impact. And we were able to sort based on a lot of behavioral and psychographic questions, understand who are people who display attributes of leadership, and who are people who are more inclined to perhaps watch from the sidelines. And based on that, we were able to speak to young leaders in this country. Embrace yourselves, because they have a pretty different perspective on the country and on what's happening relative to probably the average demographic in this room tonight. And I see you young people, I do, and you're doing your bit to bring the average down in this room, but there's a demographic. I see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, here she is.
What we know based on what different generations of leaders are telling us is that there is a powerful chasm, a real difference between what young leaders are thinking and feeling about the state of the country today and where they want to take it and how they want to get there, relative to what older, slightly more lived experience leaders are thinking and feeling. So we use the word baby boomers a lot, but we're really talking about people over the age of 45, 50, and older than that. I'm a Zennial. I'm on the cusp of Gen X and Millennial, so we're just used to being overlooked all the time, and yay us. When you talk to young leaders, they have deep dissatisfaction with where things are at in the country today. They feel profound need for change. They look at what is happening around climate change, around inequality, around economic opportunity, around quality of life, and they are expressing deep levels of dissatisfaction. When they are asked about the legacy of the generations that have come before them, do you think that the people who've been doing the stuff before you were doing it, have they left the country in a better place or a worse place? They are pretty negative about the legacy of baby boomers. By contrast, what we see in baby boomers are people who feel like they've done their best and they left Canada in a pretty good place, and they don't necessarily have that level of trust or confidence in the younger generations to take the keys.
Interesting. Ray, you've traveled through many of these polls, intimately, like Shachi does. Give us your take on what's your gut instinct on, number one, what this poll means. Shachi described very much of it, but give me your take on this.
I agree with the basic assessment. I think, the easy answer is to look at the data and to say the younger generation, 43% of those under the age of 40 basically chose the option, we're dissatisfied, we need to restructure society, we need to blow it all up.
Burn it all down.
And burn it all down, whatever. That said, I don't think that's the right interpretation of the data when you dig deeper. Shachi touched on it. I think there is a sense of dissatisfaction with what they've been handed, and with that, I'm with them. I take a look at where we are at, and Cardus has talked about building on 2,000 years of Christian social thought. The 20th century is not going to be known as the high point for digging into those resources and applying them to the various institutions of society. So there is a sense in which this is a generation that has inherited a lot of brokenness, a lot of experimentation. We did the global news thing the other day, and the reporter was very focused on comparing this poll to the 60s. I think perhaps overdid the analogy a bit, but there is something about a similar feeling with this new generation of leadership than there was in the 60s in terms of a dissatisfaction with what was. But the boomers were there in the 60s, they had that, and they went on a whole bunch of experimentation, and it didn't work. And so now the new generation is looking back and saying, you built all of this stuff, and it's not as great as you think it is.
Interesting. I do at some point want to jump into the whole quality of life distinction between the plus 65-year-olds and the 19 to 29-year-olds. That's a fascinating difference, but we're going to kind of pick up let's move a little bit onto the demographic kind of question. And Andreae, I want to bring you on that. But before I do, let's turn it over to Daniel. Give us, Daniel, just a quick back to the video on the next section, just looking at demographics, and then we'll jump into that. Andreae, you're off first.
How good has life been for each generation of Canadians? Well, the Angus Reid Institute found a significant generation gap on that question. Ask the 18 to 29 set, and they'll tell you that they've been lucky in terms of educational attainment and social acceptance. Those who are 30 to 40 years old give a somewhat different answer. Leaders name opportunities for travel and education, whereas non-leaders recognize their quality of life has been good. Not surprisingly, those 18 to 40 don't feel very lucky in terms of property ownership. For those over 40, there's pretty universal agreement that they've had a good quality of life, and there's strong recognition that they've got it good in terms of owning property. And maybe there's some resentment in the generation gap. The younger the respondent, the more negative their view of the baby boomers' legacy. Leaders are markedly down on boomers, with almost 70% of those aged 18 to 29 saying boomers leave a bad legacy. On the flip side, what do millennials, those aged 25 to 40, think about the legacy their own generation will leave? Well, the younger the respondent, the more likely they are to say they'll leave things better than the boomers did. More than half of millennials expect their generation to make a positive difference. And one more point. While at least 6 in 10 leaders in all age groups say God and religion have no place in public life, more than a third of 18 to 29-year-olds say the opposite. That group is the most accepting of Canadians in public positions, speaking and acting in accordance with their faith.
Okay. That was a lot to get into, but you know what, Andreae, you're sitting here, you're part of the community that we're talking about, that we're so interested in tonight. Does this resonate with you? Does this match with the world that you see around? Give us a bit of a sense from kind of your vantage point as the next generation we're counting on.
Yeah, excellent question. I'm not sure. I know I, in theory, meet the requirements of this demographic, but have the personality of a 65-plus-year-old. So regrettable that I am the representative for the whole demographic. Yeah, I think there has been, especially coming off of a pandemic year, this overwhelming sense amongst us of this sense of despairing. And, admittedly, I am surrounded by a lot of Christian leaders, and I think that we are trying to motivate ourselves to hope. And, the very last statistic that was shared here of how many of us are accepting of people in public life publicly expressing their religious beliefs, I think that was surprising for me to see. A very silent group, perhaps, not on the tweeter all the time. Thank you for laughing at that one. Who, just are willing to see that kind of expression, I think is actually a better statistic than I anticipated.
Interesting. Shachi, can you jump in on this? And I want to get a sense of the durability of these attitudes. So you've taken a picture of the attitudes, but that doesn't necessarily mean those attitudes are durable over a long period of time. So get to questions around despair, get to questions around changing, like for example, will those attitudes change in the future, analyzing the history and the legacy of baby boomers?
Well, I left my crystal ball at the table, Michael.
You know what? I got faith in you. You can do this.
So that cohort, that youngest cohort who find themselves most open to the expression of faith in the public square, that tracks for me, because think about who these folks are and where they are in their lives. They're much more likely in the last 5 to 10 years of their life, if they were at home with a family of faith, to have been perhaps attending services or been continuing to do that through university. The expression and the practice of faith is not so far removed from those years where then you're maybe away from family, away from home, away from school structures, and you're going through a period of exploration and perhaps a period of less practice of your faith. So that doesn't surprise me. The question is, do they stay that way? And as we know from studies that we've done together, Michael and Ray, over the years, is that younger cohort that tends to be a little bit more faithful and a little bit more faith accepting tends to fall away in their 20s, in their 30s, and what will be the determinant of what brings them back is, are they having children, and are they making decisions about wanting to raise their children in faith so they find themselves coming back to it, or are they making decisions not around doing that, or are they simply not having kids? So this is where we need to talk about quality of life and access to quality of life. We heard the very Honorable David Johnston talk about his 5 children and his 14 grandchildren. Economically speaking, can you imagine for a young person in the GTA or in Metro Vancouver today being part of trying to, first of all, get yourself established in work, get a place that you can afford? The next story of the next 6 to 8 months in very practical terms will be one of inflation and job insecurity. You're talking about getting married, you're talking about starting families. All of this, yes, it requires community and convivium and the reliance on strong family and community networks, and that's where faith can play a role, but it costs a lot of money.
Okay, can I press you on that, Shachi?
Sure.
Okay, something doesn't make sense to me on this. So 65 years of age, some of those people in this room, they wouldn't conceive of buying the kind of quality and expensive Starbucks that we buy today. Just walk into your kitchen and look at the appliances that make life absolutely dramatic. Look at the educational attainment that even these young people are seeing. We're way better educated today before. The quality of life doesn't match. I'm having trouble matching this. Is this an attitude that is not deserving, or is this an attitude that is actually reflective of really what's going on? What's your gut sense on that?
Well, I can give you gut sense, and I can give you a bit of lived experience, Michael Dare.
Okay.
All of the saved Starbucks.
That's unfair. Just do it.
All of the Starbucks and all of the avocado toast that I didn't buy in my 20s and 30s made absolutely no difference to the mortgage payment and the length of the mortgage cycle that young people are facing.
Fair game.
So
That's
it's
fair.
not just about the sacrifices. I hear you, and I hear you. We had a sidebar about this a few moments ago. But this is about what now feels like to so many 20 and 30-somethings about the loss of grasp of the Canadian dream. That you can go to school, you can earn a degree. You talk about them not buying those expensive coffees in a different generation, in a different day and age. They also weren't graduating with a bachelor's or a master's in tens of thousands of dollars of student debt, which then just delays the onset of the markers of life that people are hoping to achieve.
So, thank you for that. That was a fair comment. Ray, just give us a little bit broader perspective. There's many people in this room, Shachi, you've intimated, they're actually not in the 65 category. They actually have gone through a world war and lived the experiences of, or have come out of a generation that is very close to World War, deep, deep trauma. And I sense they don't resonate even with so much of this discussion. Is that a reasonable observation? That's one of a segment of the demographic that we missed in this study. Play that out for me in larger context.
I think there's an interesting piece, and we haven't teased. We've got the data, and all the data tables are online, but it'll be future reports that we really tease this out. But that is the trust and involvement in different institutions. And when you take a look at the data, what you're seeing is a younger generation that is it's a totally different set of institutions. And this is we are now finishing a first complete life cycle of predominant number of people who've grown up where divorce is normal, where the mixed family, and so surprise, you look at belief in institution and the family, you look at belief in some of the other traditional institutions. There is a totally different belief set in terms of what institutions can offer. Our family program has done some great work in the project that Peter, John, and Andreae released just last week in terms of younger attitudes towards marriage and the belief in the institution and the value that marriage was. That wasn't even a question for the older generation. They may have chosen to get married or not get married, but they understood the institution in a certain way. We now have a generation who haven't seen the model, who don't know this from the first-hand experience. And we can go, one of the fascinating things, if I can just jump on the previous question you asked Shachi, which I found fascinating, is basically when you looked at the data from 40 up, the understanding of economics and where they put priorities was balancing the budget, economic growth, jobs, pure traditional economic sort of things of good that we would say is good stuff. The younger generation, it was affordability, it was equality, inequality, inequity. It was actually when the equity came to the social side in terms of, it didn't come in terms of supply and demand and understand what actually makes jobs. I think part of that is what Shachi outright said in terms of looking at houses. It doesn't matter how many Starbucks you buy or don't buy. If you want to buy a house in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver and have a job and do that, there are people who are waiting for their parents' inheritance before they can think of putting the down payment.
Okay, we got just 30 seconds on this session. Andreae, will the next generation rebuild the trust? Can there be a rebuilding of trust in the next generation, especially for kind of the historic institutions that we've kind of taken for granted before? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And looking at one piece of the data that we haven't spoken about is leaders' engagement, especially in the 18 to 29 group. And you'll notice that a lot of them are willing to contact public officials or attend a protest. But many are not actively participants in political parties or haven't actively campaigned in a political party. And so in terms of this sort of restructuring and what parts or what types of institutions we have lost faith in or that we are trying to restructure in a specific way, I'm actually interested to see what exactly our concerns are, because it doesn't seem like the political structures are necessarily the ones that we're concerned with in particular.
Did you just say that we need to renew Canada's social architecture?
Yeah, not that word again, not that word again. Okay, there's just too much here, but I want to get on to the spectrum of the spectrum of spirituality. And Shachi, I'm going to kind of get at you first on this question, but let's go back to Daniel Proussalidis and just run that video, Daniel, and spectrum of spirituality.
What place does faith have in Canadians' lives? Cardus's partnership with the Angus Reid Institute has established a unique measurement of this called the spectrum of spirituality. It's based on a series of questions about things like belief in God, feeling God's presence, or frequency of prayer. In 2021, we found some generational differences there. Those over 40 are most likely to believe in God, to feel God's presence, or to pray. Those aged 18 to 29 are the least likely to have had a formal entrance into a religious tradition, such as baptism. While the 40 and under group is generally less religious, those aged 18 to 29 are more likely than those aged 30 to 40 to believe in life after death, to attend religious services, and even to read religious texts. Taking all those factors together, we get the four mindsets of the spectrum of spirituality. Non-believers, typically atheist or agnostic. Spiritually uncertain, vaguely theist, but without strong religious identity or practice. Privately faithful, a religious identity, and some private practices without regular worship service attendance or speaking publicly about faith. Religiously committed, strong belief in God, typically with regular participation in religious activities and organized religion. In 2021, 42% of Canadians fall into the spiritually uncertain mindset, a group that's seen pretty steady growth since March 2017. Non-believers have grown too, rising from 18% of Canadians to almost 1 in 4. The privately faithful have been reduced by almost half in just 4 years. The religiously committed have bounced around a bit, but usually are about 1 in 5 Canadians.
Wow, that's dramatic. Shachi, this is an innovation, a way of understanding spiritual dynamics in this country. And you guys built this. You and Ray and Angus spent a lot of time thinking about it. Give us the methodology. Give us a bit of the technical understanding of why this way of looking at spirituality in Canada is so important.
Well, first of all, data, right? And we hear so much from our public leaders, from the media discourse, from other corners, from people in our lives, that Canada's becoming more secular, Canada's becoming more secular, Canada's becoming more secular. We wanted to understand, well, what does that really mean? Yes, possibly in terms of signed up church membership, that may be the case, but we wanted to also understand at the beginning of this, to get the lay of the land about what people perceive when they hear vocabulary and concepts and words that have to do with faith. So maybe concepts like religion and sin trigger a very robust response and maybe not the most positive one. But words like spirituality and faith and belief are ones that people are more open to. And so it's based on that continuum and based on those behaviors that we were able to understand who in this country absolutely 100% rejects the notion of God, a higher power, and a sense of religious belief. You saw them, you saw the numbers there. But everyone else is somewhere on that continuum, from maybe believing a little bit, whether that's coming to terms with it in very vulnerable moments or the last moments of their life, to people who are all in and who have had that belief guide them consistently through every chapter of their life.
Okay, Pennings, put your cultural analyst hat on here. You've lived with this now for a long time. You spoke on it a lot. What about these results? Does this change your views with a poll of 4,000 respondents? Like, is this a shift, or is this a continuation of what you were already anticipating?
We've seen the trend of these numbers since we developed this index for the first time in April of 2017, and I think we've done 9 polls in which we've measured since then, and we have seen these trends go. I think what is significant about this, if I can just build on what Shachi says, in terms of religion, obviously there's a very personal sense of my own salvation in terms of what I believe and, you know, life after death and those questions. But there was also a very public question about all of this. The fact is that, you know, I've used the analogy, the environmental analogy. To some extent, the religion of the country is like the rainforest in Brazil. I've never been to Brazil. I've not seen the rainforest. But I understand that if you tear it all down, it's going to have an effect on the environment, on the air we breathe here. Institutions of faith are the social rainforest that produce the oxygen that we breathe that makes a society a healthy society. Almost every hospital, almost every university in this country has religious roots. And what we're seeing here are 2 things. One, there's amnesia. Most Canadians don't have a clue that, you know, Wilfrid Laurier used to be Waterloo Lutheran, that McMaster used to be a Baptist school, that's where the roots, the money, the energy, and all the hospitals and everything else. We somehow, and we've done previous poll that show, you know, 20, 30, 40% of Canadians have no clue in terms of the religious roots of many of the institutions that make life livable. There's also the fact that there is hostility. And this is, in a very ironic way, where these polls give me hope and optimism as opposed to pessimism.
Interesting.
On the one hand, we've had this core of 20% give it within the margin of error, every poll in terms of the religious committee. These are the people who are going to church, who believe in God, who are doing all 6 or 7 of the things that we're measuring. When it came to the privately faithful, the people who were doing 4 or 5 of them, we have seen in 5 years a 15% move from the religious to the non-religious. These were the civic Christians. These were the people who were showing up, who checked the box, said, I'm a Christian, went once a year or whatever to a church, to a cultural sort of thing, but it was not a meaningful part of their lives. They have moved away, and what we have now is a sense, and we're seeing this among young people. You know, Daniel mentioned the numbers. The largest group that reads the sacred text or goes to church is the under 30. We did another poll a few years ago that also say it's immigrants, those born outside the country in first generation. The growing groups demographically in this country are people who are taking faith more seriously, and by 10% are more positive about the role of faith in public life.
Quick on that, Shachi, and then I want to just hear from Andreae.
Sure. So we can't know for sure whether those younger people who are consistently practicing faith today will stick with it. But we do know absolutely from the data that we've seen, and also from StatsCan, from empirical data about immigration trends, that it is newcomers to Canada who have refreshed and renewed the pews, the synagogues, the mosques, the mandirs, the gurdwaras. And so the one thing I would say in rooms such as these, I've been to leadership prayer breakfasts across the country. I love that organizations are rooted in the faith that they're rooted in, but when we talk about the future of faith and religion in this country, we may well have to talk about a future that is more interfaith and more pluralistic in terms of how do you come together? How do you do that outreach? Because to your point, Ray, those privately faithful, they have been rocked by a series of moments that have caused them to doubt. Look at where we've been on the reconciliation file in the last year. Look at where we've been on a lot of these things. We may lose those folks, but you've got a steady supply of new fellow travelers, and the key is to work in partnership with them.
Andreae, your parents immigrated into this country,
So
and they
did
made huge
I.
stats. So did you. That's right. So did you. So we need to hear that. How does what Ray and Shachi are arguing resonate with you on both those fronts, both on the fact that you're next generation and that you're actually an immigrant?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to speak on behalf of all fellow immigrants, but
Well, do the best you can.
I'd say, yeah, I mean, this was a conversation we were just having at dinner. The primary reason why my family chose Canada was the freedom to practice our religion, freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. And so, you know, these trends of immigration and the growing sort of like warmness to practicing your faith in public life in the 18 to 29 demographic is definitely, you know, one that I personally resonate with.
Gut instinct, young people more faithful in the future, or will it wear off?
I'm trying to have hope.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. That's fair. You know what? We're going to move now to just dig into this whole faith in public life, and we're going to bring Daniel up for the last time. So check this out, Daniel Proussalidis on the video.
So how do Canadians really feel about public expressions of faith? The Cardus and the Angus Reid Institute partnership has yielded some deep insights into that question. When Canadians are asked whether the overall presence of a particular religious tradition in public life is beneficial or damaging to Canada and Canadian society, the answer really depends on where one lands within the spectrum of spirituality. When this question was asked in 2017, Catholicism, Protestantism, evangelicalism, and Judaism all had positive scores among the privately faithful and religiously committed, while the spiritually uncertain were more ambivalent. Islam attracted negative scores across the board, but the most religious Canadians were the least negative about that faith. Non-believers were down on every faith except their own, while the religiously committed expressed the highest tolerance. Now, some things have changed since then. In 2021, Catholicism, Protestantism, and evangelicalism have all suffered in terms of public esteem, even among the privately faithful and religiously committed. Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism have generally improved in public esteem, dramatically in some cases. But some things haven't changed much. Non-believers still tend to be down on faiths other than their own, while stronger religiosity is still generally associated with higher tolerance for religious diversity. The reasons for these changing views are likely complex and varied. However, thinking back to the headlines of the last 4 years, there should be little doubt that the stories we tell about each other do influence public perceptions. Residential schools, American politics with its religious dimensions, and even the experience of COVID-19 all affect the narrative around Canada's religious traditions and communities.
There's a lot there, and we'll try to get into that in a really short period of time. But there's one piece of data, Ray, that I just cannot help kind of get your perspective on. Why in the world are deeply religious people so committed to the other religions as well? Remarkably different than those who are non-religious. Play that out. What does that actually mean in how we live together in society?
I've been using this, what I call my tolerance slide. It's saved with that title in my hard drive. And I particularly enjoyed going to totally secular audiences. I went to Moses and Andreae invited me a couple of years ago to Idea City, which is basically a TED Talk with over 1,000 corporate leaders in the country. And I put that slide up and highlighted the fact that when we talk about tolerance, and tolerance ultimately is respect for someone who's different than you. To say you're tolerant, to say I like everybody in this room because we're all similar, isn't really an example of tolerance. It's we're all of the same tribe. The tolerance is tested when you deal with people who are different. What is remarkable, and the data has shown this consistently, is that people of faith have different views of different faiths, but they are the most respectful of people of different faiths. And you highlighted in terms of the changing pluralism and demographic makeup and immigrant makeup, and there are lots of challenges. I don't want this to be a panacea as if there are no challenges embodied in that. But fundamental is the fact of an understanding of the human person in which we are not just physical people, we are not just emotional people, we're also spiritual people. And whether you're a Sikh, a Jew, a Muslim, a Hindu, or a Christian, we all understand there is that spiritual dimension of life. What the secular experiment has been to say we have to live our lives in the public square as if that spiritual dimension doesn't exist. You've got to take it out, you've got to bury it in the closet, you can't talk about it. And the result is we have less than full humans participating in the public square. What is remarkable is when you take a look at, the slide of the non-religious, 2017, they're negative, atheists are negative about the contribution of society of everybody but themselves. Going back to tolerance, in other words, they're not tolerant.
Interesting. Okay, there's a lot to think about there, but Shachi, I want to take this a little bit forward to today's space. Daniel kind of intimated some of the challenges around COVID and how faith communities worked in that context, residential schools, all that kind of stuff. Is the drama of the last couple of years around these situations going to fundamentally and structurally change how we understand faith in public life? It's an easy question, Shachi.
It's a very... No.
Do you want me to go get the crystal ball?
Who am I in this conversation? Ray, should I just yield my time back to you and you can talk about what happened in September and how I am not the person to speak to this?
This is a fundamental. We know this is a fundamental question that we have to get a sense of, because these last 18 months have been dramatic 18 months. Will they tell a new story about how we experience faith in our public life?
Can I actually just reframe? And you mentioned September along the way, and I think probably the majority of the audience, but perhaps not all. Shachi made the national news in September. She was the moderator of the leaders' debate. And she asked very directly about Bill 21 in Quebec.
Yep.
And she had the courage. She had the courage to ask the question directly, to call it what it was, a discrimination law, and she made headlines for 3 days. And, I didn't call you 8 times a day, and I didn't go back to the golf course, but we did chat during that period of time. And I, for one, applauded her and think that it's very important. But it's remarkable about the political discourses in this country is where the moderator of a debate asking people who want to be the prime minister of this country isn't even allowed to ask the question about a law that says a Sikh wearing a turban can't be employed in the province of Quebec, and nobody dares talk about it.
Shachi.
I think, what do I think? I think that when it comes to tolerance today for faith in the public square, Canadians are pretty unequivocal, saying we'd rather not have it, thank you. We don't want to start our council meetings with a prayer. We don't want to start our parliamentary sessions with an appeal to a higher power. It's just not something that we're into. And somewhere along the way, the discourse around politicians explaining how they can be people of faith without imposing their faith on policy and legislation took a turn, and it has become politically an inconvenient and, in fact, it becomes a liability for politicians to talk about. I don't have a good explanation for how we got there, but as a country, that's where we are. And there's a talk that I give from time to time about the differences between, and I'm using air quotes here, people, the religious right and the religious left. And I think what the difference has been over the last 50 or 60 years, we talk about going back to the 60s, is that in the 60s, many of the social justice, poverty, equality, acceptance movements that were aimed at improving the lives of people were publicly spearheaded and championed by religious leaders. I think about the Catholic Church marching with farm workers in Chicago with RFK and that movement, and
Tommy
how powerful.
Douglas,
And Tommy Douglas, exactly, closer to home. The last time I gave this talk to a room full of people, I challenged them. I think it was like the basement of a Coast Hotel in Edmonton. And I said, you are the fragments of the religious left, because so many people of faith have more or less abdicated that work to government and said, we've passed legislation to do this, we've passed legislation to do that, and our work here is done. And so what the public tends to see, and Ray, we talk about this, is religiosity as something that says no, religiosity as something that wants to buck a trend or not get vaccinated or not be helpful, whereas we know religious communities through the pandemic, for example, have been the first to lean in and help and prop people up. And we know that religious institutions, the churches, the gurdwaras, the synagogues, the mosques are not just places for prayer, but also to help you find a job, to help you find a babysitter or a nanny so that you can go to work, and to really just help your entree and your runway into this country. We don't spend enough time talking about those stories.
Andrea, you're the director of policy at Cardus.
That's what they tell me. Yes.
Yeah. Can this animate you to build good public policy around this? Does this get you going?
Yeah, I think so. You're my boss, so I think I have to say that. But I think, honestly, I was trying to build out a story of who these 18 to 29-year-olds are. And, if it's true that we want to restructure, it is also true that we're overwhelmingly concerned with the common good. We are also, a 40%-ish of us love Canada. One of 3 leaders believe that there's a role for faith in public life. And in general, we are quite optimistic about our ability to leave things better than we found it. So far be it from me to be the optimist here on the panel, but I think, the stats could be better, but they certainly could be worse. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity ahead.
Welcome on board.
Thank you.
Ray, it's just so inspiring to hear you kind of pull the depths of history, of philosophy, of religion and theology into just practical day-to-day policy and polling. Shachi, many of us in this room, we saw the uncomfortableness of that interview and saw the courage of that interview. Ray, I didn't think you would bring it up, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but you know what? I'm so proud to know you, and I'm thankful that you can dig into this polling research and tell hopeful stories of what the future will look like, and tell honest stories about what the future will look like as well. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. So appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a hand.
That brings us to the end of the formal part of the night, which means that the real fun can begin. So we're done the formal evening, but as we sort of end, I want to just reflect with a few words of thanks. First of all, to thank our many, many generous donors for enabling us to do this work. I know that bread is on my table because of the gifts and the generosity that you provide, but not only is my family able to be fed because of your gifts, but Cardus can continue to do the work that shows that what may be perceived by some to be a liability in public life is an actual asset in real people's lives. That religion, whether it's refugees who are coming to this country for the first time, whether it's those who are suffering from addiction, whether it's those who are abused and need a place to see and be seen as a person, that religion is the place that actually provides that asset, and it's the only one that will help those assets to grow. And so I want to thank our donors. I want to thank all of you for joining us from the bottom of my heart, for joining us for this evening. And I want to encourage you to continue to follow us, continue to follow the work that we're doing to highlight the good work that religion is doing, to show that religion is, particularly in our case, Christianity, but not just that, but in other communities, as we've shown with our Diakonia project, it's a place in which we can actually see one another as human beings, where that chain of humanity can actually be forged and made to grow stronger. So I'd encourage you to follow us, join us, keep joining this motley crew, and keep giving us plenty of feedback. I'd like to say one more thanks, and that's to the staff who helped put this meal on tonight. Cardus is very serious about the fact that none of this stuff would happen without your skill, your attention, and your service. And so I'm wondering if we can give a rousing round of applause to the folks who helped bring us this dinner tonight. Simon, thanks for taking care of me. You're a good man. You got a beautiful haircut. The bar is still open. The night is not over. The formal programming is, but the night is young. Let's continue to have fun. Let's continue to enjoy one another's presence. Thank you. God bless you and Godspeed. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us remotely for this gala. We're so grateful that you've walked this path with us, and it's because of you that we are established here in Canada and around the world. We thank you for 2 decades and for tonight. God bless you.